The wind screamed across observation post 7 like something alive and vengeful, carrying snow so thick it erased the world beyond 50 meters. Corporal Autumn Keller stood alone in the frozen timber tower, her breath clouding white in air cold enough to crack steel, watching nothing but an endless white void that swallowed sound, sight, and hope. 420 meters, negative 22 degrees, 25-knot crosswind gusting to 30, 23 bullets between catastrophe and salvation. They said she wasn't ready. They said the post didn't matter. They were wrong on both counts. But to understand why, you need to know about the 3 weeks nobody saw. 21 days earlier, December 15th, 1984, Fort Greely, Alaska. The Cold War burned at its coldest point in a decade. Ron Reagan sat in the White House speaking of evil empires while Soviet submarines prowled beneath Arctic ice, and satellite imagery showed troop movements along disputed territories that had no names on any map the public would ever see. The briefing room at Fort Greely smelled of coffee gone bitter, and the particular tension that comes when intelligence reports use words like imminent and credible threat. Captain James Thornton stood before a topographical map marked with red indicators clustered along the western approach to the base. He was 44 years old, career infantry, with a face that had forgotten how to smile somewhere between his second and third deployment. Lieutenant David Brenner sat to his right, 31 and eager, the kind of officer who believed modern intelligence analysis could predict enemy movement with scientific precision. He had a stack of satellite imagery reports in front of him and the confidence of someone who had never been catastrophically wrong. The room held 15 soldiers, 14 men and 1 woman. Autumn Keller sat in the back corner, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, making herself small in the way she had learned to do over 7 years of service. At 27, she had mastered the art of professional invisibility. Thornton's pointer tapped the map with sharp precision. Soviet reconnaissance activity has increased 17% in the past month. Primary threat assessment indicates Western approach as most likely avenue of attack. His voice carried the flat certainty of a man reading from scripture. All defensive assets will focus there. 1st Platoon reinforces the main line. 3rd Squad supplements 2nd Platoon defensive positions. Mortars on standby. We're expecting them to come through here if they come at all. The pointer struck the western sector 3 times for emphasis. Lieutenant Brenner stood, shuffling through personnel files with the distracted efficiency of someone performing a bureaucratic obligation rather than making tactical decisions. His eyes barely touched each folder before moving to the next. When he reached the file marked Keller, Autumn M., he spent perhaps 3 seconds scanning the tab. Keller, you're on Observation Post 7, Eastern Observation Post, standard 12-hour rotations, weather permitting. Autumn felt the words land like stones in cold water. OP7, the joke assignment. The place careers went to stagnate and motivated soldiers went to prove they weren't motivated anymore. Yes, sir. Her voice came out steady and professional, because she had learned long ago that emotion was a luxury female soldiers couldn't afford. Brenner had already moved on to the next name, the next checkbox, the next forgettable assignment for a forgettable soldier. The briefing continued. Resources flowed toward the western approach like water finding its level. Additional machine guns, thermal optics for low visibility, pre-registered mortar coordinates, overlapping fields of fire. The western sector became a fortress of American firepower and tactical preparation. OP7 got a radio frequency and a reminder to call if anything unusual happened, which it wouldn't, which it never did. After the briefing, Autumn walked across the compound toward the supply depot, her boots crunching through snow that had been packed down by 1,000 other boots walking the same paths, day after day, routine after routine. The December sun hung low and weak on the horizon, barely bothering to rise before beginning its surrender back toward darkness. Sergeant First Class Marcus Wade fell into step beside her, a 49-year-old lifer with 3 deployments and the particular kindness that some senior NCOs develop toward soldiers they consider beneath worry. "Eastern Watch, huh?" He shook his head with what might have been sympathy. "Lucky you, Keller. Bring a book, maybe 2. "Yes, Sergeant. Nothing ever happens out there. You'll be cold and bored, but at least you'll be safe." She nodded and kept walking. Wade meant well. They all meant well. That was almost worse than if they'd meant badly. At the supply depot, Private First Class Tyler Brooks loaded cold weather gear into her rucksack with the casual efficiency of 19-year-old confidence that had never been tested by anything more challenging than basic training. He grinned at her, all teeth and thoughtless youth. "OP7? Seriously?" He laughed, actually laughed. "Man, Corporal, you drew the easy duty. Bring a pillow. Hell, bring 2. You can catch up on all the sleep you want out there." Autumn accepted the gear without comment and signed the equipment roster. Brooks was still chuckling when she walked out into the cold. She had heard it all before. The assumptions, the casual dismissals, the unspoken message that a woman in a combat arms specialty was a diversity checkbox rather than a tactical asset. She had 7 years of service, 2 combat deployments, and a sniper qualification that put her in the top 12% of her graduating class at Fort Benning. Lieutenant Brenner hadn't bothered to read past her name and rank. None of them had. The memory came without warning, the way they always did. 6 months earlier. Different deployment, different country, different heat instead of cold. Patrol moving through disputed territory along a main supply route that intelligence had declared clear. Staff Sergeant Collins led from the front, confident and experienced, following the route exactly as planned. Autumn had been riding in the 3rd vehicle, studying the roadside through a window that turned the world into a narrow frame of dirt and scrub. She saw it the way a hunter sees the broken branch or the bird that doesn't fly, the pattern that doesn't fit. Disturbed earth, too uniform, too recent. The particular texture of ground that has been dug up and smoothed down by someone who knows they're not supposed to be digging. Classic IED indicators. She had called it forward to Collins over the vehicle intercom. "Staff Sergeant, I've got disturbed earth, right side of the road, 100 meters ahead. Possible IED placement." Collins had barely glanced at the spot. "Intel says this route is clear, Keller. Don't overcomplicate things." They had driven past. 3 days later, a different convoy had used the same route. The IED had been there, exactly where Autumn had identified it. The explosion had killed Specialist David Chen instantly and wounded 4 others. Sergeant Patricia Morrow had lost her right leg below the knee and would spend the rest of her life explaining to strangers why she walked with a limp. Autumn had attended the memorial service for Chen. She had stood in the back, silent, while the chaplain talked about sacrifice and service and the randomness of war. She had watched Chen's mother weep into her hands and had felt the guilt settle into her chest like shrapnel that no surgeon could remove. She had been right, she had called it, and nobody had listened. The vow she made that day was simple and absolute. Never again. Next time she saw danger coming, she would act, with permission or without. Because staying quiet, being professional, following the chain of command, all of that meant nothing if people died because she was too polite to insist. Now they had given her OP7, the forgotten post on the forgotten flank, and told her nothing would happen. She would be ready anyway. The next morning arrived in the particular darkness that Alaska calls dawn in December. A grudging gray that never quite commits to daylight. Autumn reached Observation Post 7 at 0500, her breath forming clouds that the wind tore apart before they could fully form. The post consisted of a timber tower 20 feet high, weathered by years of wind and neglect, standing alone on the eastern edge of the base perimeter. The approach beyond stretched for miles. Boulder fields and dead timber and natural defilade that could hide an army if that army knew what it was doing and had weather on its side. Nobody had maintained OP7 in months. Snow had drifted against the base. The ladder rungs carried ice. The platform at the top looked like it might collapse under the weight of a hard thought, let alone a soldier and equipment. Autumn was halfway up the ladder, testing each rung before committing her weight, when she heard the voice below. "Careful on that seventh rung from the bottom. Wood's rotted through." She looked down. Master Sergeant Warren Bishop stood at the base of the tower, looking up at her with eyes that had seen more winters than she had seen years. He was 62 years old, with a face carved by weather and time into something resembling weathered granite. His uniform was immaculate despite the early hour. A faded combat patch from the Korean War occupied his right shoulder, a detail most soldiers his age would have replaced with something more recent, more relevant, more impressive. Bishop hadn't replaced it. "Sergeant," Autumn said, surprised, "didn't know anyone else was assigned here." "I'm not," he gestured at the tower. "Just checking what they're sending soldiers into these days. Place is a death trap." Autumn continued climbing, avoiding the seventh rung, and pulled herself onto the platform. Bishop was right. The structure groaned under her weight. The firing position consisted of sandbags so old they had fossilized and a wooden rest that had warped into uselessness. Bishop climbed up behind her with the careful movements of a man whose joints remembered injuries from decades past. He surveyed the platform with the critical eye of someone who understood the difference between adequate and prepared. "You're Keller." "Yes, Sergeant." "They assign you here for the next rotation?" "Yes, Sergeant." He nodded slowly, studying her the way a jeweler studies a stone, looking for flaws, looking for potential, looking for something beneath the surface. His eyes settled on the M24 rifle slung across her back. "Fort Benning Sniper School?" "Yes, Sergeant." "How'd you do?" "Top 12% of my class." "Not bad," he paused. "But you've never shot in an Alaska winter, have you?" The question landed with the weight of an accusation, disguised as an inquiry. Autumn felt her jaw tighten slightly, the only outward sign of defensiveness she allowed herself. "No, Sergeant." "Then you're not ready." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Not cruel, not dismissive, just factual, delivered with the calm certainty of someone who had seen unready soldiers die in conditions exactly like these. Bishop walked to the edge of the platform and pointed toward the eastern approach. "Boulder cluster, 600 meters. Dead pine struck by lightning, 880. Stone foundation remnants, 1150. You see them?" Autumn looked. Through the morning gloom, she could barely distinguish the shapes he described. "Barely, Sergeant. In a blizzard, you won't see them at all. But you'll need to know exactly where they are because that's where they'll come through if they come. Natural concealment. Dead zones from every other observation point. Perfect infiltration route if someone bothers to study the terrain." He turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw something behind the weathered exterior. Not disappointment, not condescension, something closer to recognition. "This post matters more than the brass thinks. I'll show you why, if you're willing to learn." Autumn studied his face, looking for the angle, the catch, the reason why a senior NCO would offer to train someone nobody else cared about. She found nothing but sincerity and something that looked like urgency. She thought of Specialist Chen, of Sergeant Morrow's missing leg, of the convoy that had driven past the IED because someone with experience hadn't insisted loudly enough. "I'm willing, Sergeant." Bishop nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Good. We start tomorrow. 0500. Don't be late." He climbed down the ladder without another word, leaving Autumn alone on the platform with a tower that groaned in the wind and questions she didn't yet know how to ask. The training began the next morning, in darkness so complete it felt like training for blindness rather than marksmanship. Bishop met her at the range with a stack of handwritten notes, a calculator, and the patient intensity of someone teaching surgery rather than shooting. Korean War, Chosin Reservoir, December 1950. His voice cut through the pre-dawn cold. Negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, 50-knot winds. Chinese forces surrounding 16,000 Marines. I was 28 years old and cocky enough to think I understood how rifles worked. He set a target at 500 meters, barely visible in the darkness. Made my first cold weather shot that morning. Aimed center mass like I'd been trained. Bullet hit 2 feet low and 3 feet right. Want to know why? Autumn did the calculation in her head. Air density. Cold air is denser, increases drag, drops the bullet faster. Wind drift compounds at longer ranges. Correct. Bishop looked at her with something approaching approval. But knowing it and compensating for it are different animals. In warmth, you learn the theory. In cold, you learn whether you survive. Over the next 3 weeks, Bishop taught her things the sniper school manual never mentioned. Because the manual assumed reasonable conditions and reasonable expectations. He taught her how to calculate wind drift using landmarks instead of instruments when instruments froze solid. He taught her how to estimate temperature effects by the texture of ice crystals in the air. He taught her how to build firing positions that wouldn't collapse under recoil and how to maintain weapon function when metal contracted and lubricants turned to paste. Most importantly, he taught her patience. Chosin Reservoir, third day of encirclement. Bishop spoke while Autumn practiced breathing cycles, the rifle rest steady beneath her. Chinese commander coordinating mortar fire from a village 700 meters out. Only shot I'd get, 30 below cold, 40-knot crosswind. Every Marine in my sector depending on that one bullet. Did you make it? 890 meters through snow and wind. Center mass. He dropped. Mortars went silent, and 40 Marines went home to their families. Bishop's voice carried no pride, only the flat recitation of fact. Command didn't believe I made the shot, gave the credit to someone else. Didn't matter. The work saved lives. That's the only recognition that counts. Autumn understood then why he was teaching her. Not for gratitude, not for acknowledgement, because he had been her once, capable and dismissed, and he had learned that excellence doesn't need an audience if it saves lives. They met every morning at 0500 and every evening at 1800, training in the gaps between official schedules, invisible to everyone who wasn't looking, which was everyone. The second week, Bishop brought topographical maps and spread them across the frozen hood of his truck. December 23rd, Weather Service forecasts a historic Arctic front. Category 3 blizzard, 0 visibility, sustained winds over 50 knots. Arrives January 4th. His finger traced the eastern approach to Fort Greely. Soviet doctrine trains for Siberian conditions. This weather isn't their disadvantage, it's their opportunity. He tapped the boulder fields. Perfect cover for infiltration, natural concealment, dead zones from Western observation posts. If I were planning an attack, I'd hit west as a diversion and flank through here when everyone's looking the wrong direction. Autumn studied the map, seeing what he saw. The terrain told a story for anyone literate enough to read it. Should we inform Captain Thornton? Bishop's laugh came out bitter and brief. Already did, 3 times. He thinks I'm senile. 3 times? December 15th briefing, December 22nd planning session. Yesterday morning direct to his office. Bishop folded the map with sharp, angry creases. 34 years of service, 67 confirmed kills in Korea. Doesn't matter. To them, I'm the old man who won't shut up about a war that ended before they were born. The parallels struck Autumn with the force of recognition. An old soldier nobody listened to. A young soldier nobody respected. Both seeing danger that command refused to acknowledge. Then we prepare without them, she said. Bishop looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we prepare without them. The third week became an obsession disguised as routine. Autumn arrived at OP 7 hours before her official watch began and stayed hours after it ended. She carried sandbags up the tower one at a time, 40 pounds each, 50 trips, until her shoulders burned and her hands bled through her gloves. She rebuilt the firing position with the precision of someone constructing a cathedral rather than a guard post. She cleared sight lines, reinforced support beams, created a windbreak that wouldn't interfere with fields of fire, built range cards by hand, calculating bullet drop and wind drift for every distance out to 1,200 meters, compensating for the extreme cold that would arrive with the storm. Nobody visited OP7. Nobody checked her work. She was completely alone with the preparation and the growing certainty that the preparation would matter. At night in the armory, she hand-loaded ammunition with Bishop watching over her shoulder. The work required precision that made surgery look casual, measuring powder charges to the kernel, seating primers with exact pressure, testing each round for consistency. Cold weather changes everything, Bishop explained while Autumn assembled her 30th round. Standard ammunition is loaded for sea level, 70 degrees. At -20, air density increases 8%. Powder burns different. Bullet velocity drops. If you don't compensate, your 500-meter zero becomes 420. He handed her a single bullet, different from the others. Sierra Match King, 168 grain, loaded with a powder charge he had calculated specifically for extreme cold and long range. Your ace in the hole. Use it when everything's on the line and you get one chance. Autumn held the round like it was sacred, which in a way it was. The physical manifestation of invisible preparation. The bullet that existed because someone believed she might need it, even though nobody else thought she would. She loaded it last in her magazines and marked it with a thin strip of tape. The dismissals continued. Lieutenant Brenner walked past her in the mess hall without acknowledgement. Sergeant Wade asked her once if she was bored yet at OP7 and didn't wait for an answer. Private Brooks made jokes about her cushy assignment to anyone who would listen. None of them knew about the preparation. None of them saw the work. December 30th arrived with weather forecasts that made veteran Alaskans nervous. The Arctic front had intensified beyond predictions. Meteorologists used words like historic and unprecedented, with the hushed tones usually reserved for disasters. Captain Thornton called an emergency briefing. The room filled with every available soldier, the air thick with tension and coffee steam, and the knowledge that weather like this could kill as efficiently as any enemy. Thornton stood before the map, now marked with concentric circles, showing the projected path and intensity of the storm. Front arrives January 4th, 0400 hours. Sustained winds, 50+ knots, gusts to 70. Temperature dropping to -25. Wind chill approaching -60. Visibility 0. This is a Category 3 Arctic event. All non-essential operations cease. Essential defensive operations continue with supplemental cold weather gear. He turned to the tactical display. Western sector receives primary reinforcement. Additional thermal optics, expanded fields of fire, supplemental ammunition. His pointer traced the defensive positions. 1st Platoon reinforces mainline here. 3rd Squad supplements here. Mortars pre-registered on likely approach vectors. The storm gives us reduced visibility, but it gives the enemy the same problem. If they're coming, they'll come through the west, where terrain funnels their approach. Lieutenant Brenner stood, holding the duty roster. Eastern observation posts maintain standard watch. OP7, that's Keller, 12-hour rotation beginning 0400, January 4th. Nobody remarked on it. Why would they? OP7 didn't matter. Nothing ever happened there. Bishop sat in the back corner, weathered face unreadable. When Thornton opened the floor for questions, Bishop stood. "Sir, permission to address tactical assessment." Thornton's expression flickered with something between irritation and obligation. "Granted, Sergeant Bishop." "Sir, the eastern approach provides optimal infiltration conditions during this storm. natural concealment, dead zones from Western observation, and terrain that Soviet doctrine specifically trains for. Recommend we reinforce Sergeant Bishop. Thornton's voice carried the particular patience of someone explaining reality to someone who refuses to accept it. Your concerns are noted. However, modern intelligence analysis indicates, sir, with respect, intelligence analysis said the Chinese wouldn't cross the Yalu River in Korea. They did. Intelligence analysis said the Chosin perimeter was secure. It wasn't. Sometimes the ground matters more than the analysis. The room went silent with the particular discomfort of junior soldiers watching senior leaders disagree. Thornton's jaw tightened. Sergeant Bishop, your experience is valued, but we're fighting a different war with different capabilities now. The Eastern approach is covered. That's final. Bishop sat down without saluting, which was as close as a career NCO comes to insubordination. After the briefing, Autumn found him outside the headquarters building, standing in falling snow that had started 2 days early. They didn't listen, she said. They never do. Bishop's voice carried 3 decades of bitter experience. Korea taught me, brass doesn't listen until body bags arrive. By then, it's too late to matter. So what do we do? He looked at her, and she saw in his eyes the same determination she felt in her chest. The refusal to accept that preparation could be wasted just because command was stupid. We finish what we started. Storm arrives in 4 days. That gives us 4 days to be perfect. The final 4 days blurred together into a singular focus that excluded everything except preparation. Autumn memorized the Eastern approach until she could see it with her eyes closed. Every boulder, every dead tree, every depression and rise and natural concealment point. She practiced engagement sequences until her muscle memory could execute them without conscious thought. Bishop tested her relentlessly. Target at 600 meters, boulder cluster, wind 15 knots quartering, temperature -20. Call your adjustment. 3.2 MOA left for wind, 1.8 up for cold air drop. Target at 880, dead pine, wind 25 sustained, gusting 30, target moving left to right, 2-second exposure window. 4.6 left for wind, wait for gust low, lead target 18 inches, fire on exhale. Over and over until the calculations became instinct, until her body knew what her mind would take too long to compute. On January 3rd, the evening before the storm arrived, Bishop met her at OP7 one final time. The tower now stood transformed, reinforced, fortified, equipped with everything she might need and nothing she wouldn't. The firing position offered perfect stability. The range cards lay laminated and ready. 30 rounds of custom-loaded ammunition weighted in magazines she had marked for quick identification. Bishop stood at the platform edge, looking out at the Eastern approach in the failing light. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a spent cartridge case. 30-06, tarnished with age but carefully preserved. Chosin Reservoir, December 10th, 1950, 890 meters through wind and snow that made this storm look friendly, saved 40 Marines. He pressed the casing into her palm and closed her fingers around it. Carried this 34 years, time someone else had it. Autumn looked at the small brass cylinder, feeling the weight of history and expectation, and something deeper she didn't have words for. Why me, Sergeant? Bishop's weathered face softened almost imperceptibly. I had a son, Michael, would have been about your age now, died in a training accident at Fort Bragg, 1979. His voice remained steady, but something in his eyes went distant. Wanted to be a ranger, fast roped out of a helicopter that didn't gain enough altitude first. Instructor error, they said. Bad luck, they said. Dead either way. He looked at the casing in her hand. Spent 5 years angry at the army that killed him. Then I realized the best way to honor him wasn't to be angry. It was to make sure the next generation of soldiers were better trained, better prepared, better equipped to survive than he was. Bishop met her eyes directly. You listen, Keller. You prepare. You understand that excellence doesn't need an audience. Michael would have been proud to serve with someone like you. I'm proud to train you. Autumn felt something crack in her chest. The careful, professional armor she had maintained for 7 years, developing a fissure she couldn't quite seal. Thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me. Just do the work when it counts. He climbed down the ladder, moving carefully in the growing darkness. At the bottom, he looked up one more time. Storm comes at 0400. Be ready. I will be. Bishop nodded once, then walked away into the night, leaving Autumn alone with the tower in the approaching storm and the weight of a bullet casing from a war fought before she was born. January 4th arrived in darkness absolute and cold that felt personal in its cruelty. Autumn climbed to OP7 at 0330, 90 minutes before her official watch began, carrying everything she might need and nothing she could afford to lose. The storm had begun 2 hours early, as if eager to prove the meteorologists had underestimated its malice. Wind screamed across the platform with sustained force that made standing upright a challenge. Snow fell horizontally, driven by gusts that transformed individual flakes into weapons. Temperature had dropped to -22 and was still falling. Visibility measured in feet rather than meters. Autumn settled into her position with the methodical calm of someone performing a ritual practiced to perfection. Range cards secured where wind couldn't take them. Ammunition counted and ready. M24 rifle functions checked and rechecked. Thermal optic tested and operational. Radio frequencies verified. The eastern approach disappeared into white chaos. At 0500, the western sector erupted with noise. Gunfire crackled through the radio, overlapping voices shouting contact reports and ammunition counts. Explosions thumped in the distance, felt more than heard through the storm's roar. Every available unit began moving west. The radio came alive with urgent coordination. Contact west! Multiple targets! First platoon moving to reinforce. Mortars, stand by for fire mission. Third squad, advance and engage. The entire defensive posture shifted like a massive organism responding to stimulus. Every asset flowing toward the threat everyone had expected, everyone had prepared for, everyone believed would be the main attack. Autumn listened to the radio traffic and felt her stomach tighten with the particular nausea of recognition. This was wrong, too convenient, too obvious, the kind of attack that announces itself because it wants to be noticed. At 0515, she heard it, a metallic sound, faint and foreign, carried on a momentary lull in the wind. The distinct clink of equipment striking equipment, rifles against load-bearing vests, metal buckles, magazine pouches. Sounds that didn't belong in an empty wilderness during a blizzard. Her hand moved to the radio handset before conscious thought caught up. She keyed the mic. OP7 to Tactical Operations Center. I'm hearing movement. Eastern approach. Approximately. OP7, this is TOC. Sergeant Wade's voice cut through, sharp with irritation. Stay off this net unless you have confirmed contact. West sector is hot. Keep the frequency clear. Autumn lowered the handset, feeling the cold seep through her gloves into her fingers. She brought the thermal optic to her eye and scanned the eastern approach through breaks in the storm. Nothing. Just white static and temperature gradients that meant nothing. Then, at 0530, she noticed the silence. In normal conditions, even in storms, you could hear wildlife, birds sheltering in timber, foxes moving through snow, the small sounds of a living landscape continuing despite weather. Now there was nothing but wind and the distant crack of gunfire to the west. Animals went quiet when predators came close. She keyed the radio again. OP7 to TOC, wildlife silence all sectors, possible. OP7, I said stay off this net. Wade's voice had escalated from irritation to anger. Clear this frequency immediately. That's an order. The radio went silent. Autumn stood alone in the tower, feeling the dismissal settle over her like the falling snow. The pattern repeating, the warnings ignored, the certainty that she was right, meeting the institutional certainty that she was wrong. She thought of the IED, of Specialist Chen's closed casket, of Sergeant Morrow learning to walk again with a prosthetic leg, of the guilt that had lived in her chest for 6 months like shrapnel no surgeon could remove. Not again, not ever again. At 0600, the visibility broke for exactly 8 seconds. Through her thermal optic, heat signatures materialized at 600 meters like ghosts taking shape. Not 1, not 5, 12, 18, 25, 38. Platoon strength. Professional spacing. Tactical bounds. Fire team wedges. These weren't militia or hastily trained insurgents. These were soldiers, moving with discipline and coordination through conditions that should have made movement impossible. This wasn't a probe. This wasn't reconnaissance. This was the main assault. And everyone was looking west at the diversion. Autumn keyed the radio one final time, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. OP-7 to actual, confirmed enemy contact, platoon strength, eastern approach, 600 meters. Captain Thornton's voice came back immediately, hard and final. OP-7, this is actual. Unless you have confirmed enemy contact, do not clog this net. We have troops engaged west. Clear this frequency immediately. The transmission ended with the sharp click of a radio cut off mid-protest. Autumn lowered the handset slowly, feeling the texture of the plastic grip against her gloved palm. Her jaw worked once, teeth clenched behind closed lips. The backup radio on her belt crackled, Bishop's voice, quiet and certain. I heard it too. They're coming. They won't believe you. They never do. She looked at the eastern approach, at the heat signatures advancing through the storm, at the threat nobody else saw because nobody else was looking. Trust your training, Autumn. Trust the work. Do what needs doing. She set down the primary radio and brought her M24 to her shoulder. The rifle felt solid and true, a physical extension of 3 weeks of preparation nobody had witnessed. Her breathing slowed to the 4-count cycle Bishop had drilled into her until it became autonomic. Her pulse dropped to combat rhythm, slowing with each controlled breath, steadying into the zone where only precision existed. The crosshairs found the point man at 620 meters. She thought of Specialist Chen, of the IED she had called and nobody had believed, of Sergeant Morrow's missing leg, of the convoy that should have stopped. She thought of Bishop's son Michael, dead at her age in a preventable accident because someone hadn't prepared properly. She thought of the 40 Marines at Chosin who went home because Bishop made an impossible shot nobody believed he could make. Her finger moved to the trigger, applying smooth pressure straight back. For everyone who didn't listen, for the convoy that hit the IED, for Michael Bishop who never got to be a Ranger, for the 40 Marines in the 890 meters and the 34 years of carrying a brass casing that represented the only recognition that mattered. For this. The rifle cracked, the sound swallowed immediately by wind and distance, and the white chaos of the storm. Through her scope, 620 meters away, the enemy point man dropped into the snow like a puppet with cut strings. 22 shots remaining. The work had begun. The enemy squad froze at 600 meters, their formation collapsing into confused clusters around the fallen point man. Autumn watched them check for a pulse, scan the white void for threats they couldn't identify, struggled to understand what had just happened. In the chaos of the Western firefight and the screaming blizzard, nobody had heard her shot. They thought it was a medical emergency, cold-related casualty, heart failure in extreme conditions, bad luck, not enemy contact. After 30 seconds of confusion, they resumed movement, still believing they were unseen. Autumn worked the bolt with practiced efficiency, The metallic sound lost in the wind. The spent casing ejected and disappeared into the snow, accumulating on the platform. She loaded the next round smoothly, her hands moving with the muscle memory of 3 weeks drilling until the motion became as natural as breathing. The team leader had moved forward to assess the point man, exposing himself at 580 meters. He knelt beside the body, one hand on his radio, the other checking for vitals he wouldn't find. Autumn's breathing cycle began again. 4-count inhale through the nose, filling her lungs completely. Hold for 2 counts. 6-count exhale through barely parted lips, steady and controlled. Her heartbeat slowed to sniper calm, the controlled pulse of someone whose body had learned to betray nothing. The world narrowed to crosshairs and calculations and the geometry of death. Wind had shifted, 17 knots now, quartering from the northeast instead of straight east. Temperature dropping, -23 degrees, air density increasing. She adjusted her scope with precise clicks. 2.8 MOA left for wind, 1.9 up for the cold air drop in increased density. The team leader stood, beginning to turn away from the body. Autumn's finger applied smooth pressure to the trigger. 3.5 pounds, 3.8, 4.0. The rifle cracked. Her sight picture confirmed the hit, team leader collapsing mid-turn across the point man's body in a configuration that would have been almost peaceful if it weren't for the absolute stillness that followed. Now the enemy knew. The remaining soldiers scattered like birds from a gunshot, voices carrying faintly through the storm, even at this distance. She couldn't hear the words, but she understood the tone. Panic edged with professional fear. They were taking precision fire from an unknown position. Their point element was gone. Their leadership was gone. And they still couldn't see where the shots were coming from. A radio operator scrambled toward cover, the distinctive antenna of a tactical radio protruding from his pack like a flag marking his importance. He was calling for help, trying to establish what was happening, attempting to coordinate a response to a threat they couldn't identify. Autumn tracked him as he moved. 610 meters. Target moving left to right at approximately 2 meters per second. She calculated the lead time, adjusted for his movement, and waited for him to stop. He went to ground behind a boulder, thinking he had found safety. The antenna still protruded above the rock like a periscope. She aimed 6 inches below the antenna, where his upper torso would be positioned if he was kneeling in standard radio posture. The rifle cracked a 3rd time. The antenna toppled sideways and disappeared behind the boulder. The enemy communications net went silent. 3 shots, 3 enemy casualties. Point man down, team leader down, radio operator down. The enemy assault had lost its forward element, its tactical leadership, and its ability to call for support. And Autumn was just beginning. The backup radio on her belt crackled with Bishop's voice, quiet and steady. Textbook shot placement, exactly like I taught you. Keep your breathing controlled. They can't find you in this storm. She didn't respond, couldn't afford to break concentration, but his voice grounded her, reminded her that she wasn't completely alone, even though she felt like the only person in the world who understood what was happening. 3 kilometers west, Sergeant First Class Marcus Wade crouched behind a reinforced fighting position, watching the western sector through thermal optics that turned the storm into gray static punctuated by heat signatures. The enemy contact that had drawn every available asset was proving strange, half-hearted. The opposing force was making noise and taking occasional shots, but their fire discipline was poor, their movements hesitant. It felt wrong. Wade had 3 deployments and enough experience to recognize when something didn't fit the pattern. Professional soldiers didn't engage this sloppily, unless they weren't trying to win, unless they were trying to be seen. He swung his optics east during a lull in the engagement, more from instinct than intention, and caught movement through a momentary break in the storm. Bodies in the snow, enemy soldiers taking cover, the distinct pattern of troops under effective fire, scattered and defensive rather than advancing and aggressive. Wade's breath caught in his throat. Someone was engaging them. Precision fire, long range, systematic elimination. He keyed his radio, voice tight with shock. "Actual, this is Wade. We have enemy contact, eastern approach, platoon strength element. They're already engaged." Captain Thornton's voice came back immediately, confusion bleeding through the tactical professionalism. "Say again, Wade? Eastern approach?" "Sir, I'm looking at it right now through thermals. Enemy casualties, soldiers taking cover, someone's shredding them with precision fire." A pause, heavy with the weight of realization. "Who? We don't have anyone out there except—" Wade finished the sentence. "OP-7, sir. Keller." The radio went silent for 3 full seconds. When Thornton spoke again, his voice had changed. Uncertainty replacing certainty. Questions replacing answers. "That's impossible. She's just guard duty." "Sir, I'm watching it happen. Someone out there is tearing them apart." In the Tactical Operations Center, Lieutenant Brenner heard the exchange and felt ice water flood his stomach. His hands moved with sudden urgency to the filing cabinet, fingers clumsy as he pulled the folder marked Keller, Autumn M. He had glanced at this file 3 weeks ago for approximately 5 seconds before assigning her to OP-7. Now he opened it completely and started reading with the sick feeling of someone discovering a catastrophic mistake, too late to prevent the catastrophe. The first page showed her sniper school graduation. Distinguished honor graduate. Top 12%. Recommended for advanced training. The second page detailed her combat deployments. 16 months total downrange. 11 confirmed enemy kills. Expert marksman qualification. Submitted for Scout Sniper Platoon consideration. The third page contained a commendation from her previous platoon commander. Corporal Keller possesses exceptional observational skills and tactical awareness. Her ability to identify threats that others miss makes her an invaluable asset. Strongly recommend assignment to reconnaissance or sniper elements. Brenner's hands started shaking. He had put a distinguished honor graduate from sniper school, a soldier with 11 combat kills, and expert marksman qualification, on a guard post he thought didn't matter. His voice came out as a whisper to the empty operations center. "Oh my God, what have I done?" He pulled a second file. Bishop, Warren J., Master Sergeant. The old NCO who had tried 3 times to warn them about the Eastern approach. The soldier Thornton had dismissed as senile, paranoid, stuck in the past. Brenner opened the file and felt the ice water in his stomach turn to lead. Korean War. 67 confirmed kills. Chosin Reservoir Commendation for actions under extreme conditions. Longest confirmed kill, 890 meters in sub-zero temperatures with sustained winds exceeding 40 knots. Recommended for Silver Star, denied due to operational classification. The file contained 3 separate tactical assessments Bishop had submitted over the past 2 weeks, each one predicting enemy infiltration through the eastern approach during the forecasted storm. Each one detailed, professional, supported by terrain analysis and historical Soviet doctrine. Each one dismissed without serious consideration. At the bottom of the last assessment, Captain Thornton had written in red ink, "Noted, recommendations do not align with current intelligence analysis." Brenner set the files on the desk with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. They had ignored a Korean War sniper with 67 confirmed kills. They had overlooked a combat-proven marksman with 11 enemy casualties. They had dismissed every warning, every tactical assessment, every piece of evidence that the Eastern approach mattered. And now a corporal they had forgotten and a sergeant they had dismissed were the only things standing between the base and a platoon-strength infiltration attack. At OP-7, Autumn had no knowledge of the realization spreading through the command structure. She existed in a bubble of focus so complete that the outside world had ceased to exist beyond her scope and the calculations required for each shot. Shot 4, machine gunner setting up a PKM on a low-rise. trying to establish suppressive fire. Range, 590 meters. Wind, 18 knots. Temperature, -24. She adjusted, breathed, fired. The gunner collapsed across his weapon before he could chamber the first belt. Shot 5. Assistant gunner attempting to take over the PKM. 4 seconds to acquire target. Adjust for new position. Fire. The assistant gunner dropped before his hands reached the weapon. Enemy support fire capability. Eliminated. Shot 6. Squad leader attempting to rally scattered elements with hand signals. 640 meters. Partial concealment behind dead timber. Narrow exposure window. She waited with the patience Bishop had drilled into her until the target shifted position, exposing center mass. The squad leader fell without completing his gesture. The brass casing ejected, landing with a soft clink on the growing pile at her feet. Autumn's fingers had gone stiff despite the gloves, each trigger press requiring conscious effort to overcome the cold, seeping into joints and tendons. Ice crystals formed on her eyelashes with each blink, forcing her to swipe them clear every 30 seconds to maintain scope clarity. The taste of copper filled her mouth where she'd bitten her lip without realizing, a small drop of blood freezing on her chin before she could wipe it away. Enemy tactical coordination, eliminated. Shots 7 through 9. 3-man flanking element attempting to use a natural draw for concealment. She took them methodically as they moved. Lead man at 540 meters, middle man at 560, rear man at 580. They went down in sequence, each one unaware of the fate of the soldier ahead until the bullet arrived. The platform beneath her feet vibrated with each shot, ancient timber groaning under recoil that had become as rhythmic as her heartbeat. Wind screamed past her ears with a sound like tearing fabric, occasionally gusting hard enough to shift her body weight against the sandbags. She could no longer feel her toes inside her boots, the cold having progressed from discomfort to numbness to something approaching absence, feet that existed only as concepts rather than physical reality. Enemy maneuver capability eliminated. The brass casings accumulated on the platform floor, each one representing a threat neutralized, a life ended, a calculation solved with precision and permanence. Autumn didn't think about the human cost, couldn't afford to. That would come later, in the quiet hours when the adrenaline faded and the reality of what she had done settled into permanent residence in her memory. Now there was only the work. The zone she had entered transcended physical discomfort. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into something elastic and malleable. Heart rate at rest, breathing at peace. Mind reduced to mathematics and wind. The rifle had become an extension of her body, an organic part of her that required no conscious thought to operate. This was what Bishop had trained her for, what 3 weeks of invisible preparation had built toward, the moment when excellence emerged from obscurity, because excellence was the only thing that could save lives. Private First Class Tyler Brooks arrived with a reinforcement squad, breathing hard from the sprint across open ground, trying to reach the eastern approach before the situation deteriorated further. He stopped at the base of the tower, raising binoculars toward the platform to see what was happening, to understand who was engaging the enemy. Through the optics, he saw Autumn Keller. She was completely motionless, except for the slight movement of her finger and the controlled rise and fall of her breathing. Her face showed no expression, no anger, no fear, no excitement, just absolute concentration, the kind of focus that exists beyond emotion in a place where only the work matters. Brooks watched her breathing cycle complete, watched her finger apply pressure, watched the rifle crack and the recoil drive back into her shoulder with perfect control. 700 meters downrange, visible through breaks in the storm, an enemy soldier dropped. Brooks lowered his binoculars slowly, his earlier mockery about bringing pillows to OP7 replaying in his mind with the sickening clarity of words that can never be taken back. His whisper came out reverent and horrified in equal measure. Holy shit, she's not defending, she's hunting. The enemy assault had devolved from professional operation to survival exercise. The soldiers who had infiltrated with discipline and coordination now scrambled for any cover they could find, pinned down by fire they couldn't locate, couldn't suppress, couldn't escape. Their casualties mounted with mechanical regularity, one every 90 seconds, each shot precisely placed, each target carefully selected for maximum tactical impact. Leadership eliminated, communications severed, support weapons neutralized, maneuver elements destroyed. They tried to advance. Autumn dropped the lead soldier at 630 meters. They tried to withdraw. She took out the rear guard at 550. They tried to establish a base of fire. She eliminated 3 soldiers in 16 seconds, shooting faster than they could process what was happening. The storm that was supposed to provide them concealment had become their prison. They couldn't see where the fire was coming from, couldn't coordinate a response, couldn't do anything except die in the snow while an invisible marksman systematically dismantled their assault. At shot 18, Autumn paused to reload. Her fingers moved automatically, dropping the empty magazine, seating a fresh one, chambering around. The pause lasted 4 seconds. When she returned to her scope, the enemy had taken advantage of the lull to attempt another advance. It didn't help them. Shot 19. Point man of the new advance element, 610 meters, center mass, down. Shot 20. Soldier attempting to provide covering fire, 570 meters. Moving target, compensated for movement and wind. Down. Shot 21. Enemy medic trying to reach wounded. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Medics were protected under Geneva Convention if they weren't armed and were marked with red crosses. This one carried an AK-47 and wore no distinguishing markings. Armed combatant, legitimate target. 590 meters, down. Through it all, Bishop's voice on the backup radio provided steady guidance. Not tactical direction. Autumn didn't need that, just presence. The reminder that she wasn't completely alone in the white void, that someone believed in her, even if command didn't. Breathing's good, pace is good, you're doing everything right. Remember chosen, remember why we do this. They can't touch you, you're a ghost in the storm. At shot 22, through a break in the weather, Autumn saw something that made her breathing falter for the first time in 30 minutes. A new figure moving among the scattered enemy soldiers with authority that transcended rank. Where the others moved with panic and desperation, this one moved with purpose. Hand signals coordinated, orders given, scattered elements beginning to consolidate under his leadership. Enemy uniform with colonel's insignia visible even at this distance. Soviet rank structure. Spetsnaz unit patches. This was their commander. The realization hit Autumn with tactical clarity. Everything she had done for the past 35 minutes, 22 enemy casualties, an assault shattered, tactical advantage seized, could be undone if this officer succeeded in rallying his forces. He was good, professional, the kind of leader who could pull victory from chaos if given enough time. She had perhaps 90 seconds before he organized a coordinated withdrawal, or worse, a final desperate assault that might succeed through sheer numbers and determination. Kill him and the assault collapses completely. Miss and he might salvage the operation. One shot, one chance. The parameters were impossible. Range, 420 meters. Closer than most of her previous engagements, but more complicated because of the conditions. Wind, 25 knots sustained, gusting to 30. The highest wind speed she had engaged in during the entire battle. Temperature, -25 degrees. The coldest conditions yet, affecting ballistics in ways that required calculation beyond what she had practiced. Target, partial concealment behind a boulder. Exposure windows lasting 2 to 3 seconds maximum. moving unpredictably as he coordinated his soldiers. Autumn's previous maximum confirmed range in training had been 380 meters. She had practiced at 420, but practice and performance under pressure were different animals. This was beyond her proven capability, beyond her comfort zone. The kind of shot that defined whether you were good or whether you were something more. Bishop's voice crackled on the backup radio, quiet but urgent. "I see him. That's their commander. Soviet insignia, officer rank." A pause. Then, "You can make this shot. Everything I taught you comes down to this moment." Autumn pulled out her handwritten notes, Bishop's Korean War techniques for extreme cold and high wind, the calculations he had taught her during pre-dawn training sessions nobody else knew about. She had one round left from the special ammunition Bishop had prepared specifically for conditions exactly like these. The ace in the hole. The bullet that existed because someone believed she might need it. She ejected her current magazine and pulled the one marked with tape. One round. The 168-grain Sierra Match King with powder charge calculated specifically for negative 20-degree temperatures and long-range precision. Loaded it. Felt the bolt close with a solid mechanical click that seemed loud despite the wind. The enemy commander continued coordinating. Hand raised, gesturing to scattered elements, mouth moving, giving orders that were beginning to restore coherence to chaos. In 60 seconds, he would have them organized. In 90, they might mount an effective assault or withdrawal. Autumn brought her breathing cycle to its deepest level yet. 4-count inhale, filling her lungs completely, feeling her rib cage expand against her gear. Hold for 3 counts. 6-count exhale, slow and perfectly controlled, feeling her heart rate drop with each expelled breath. Heart rate at rest. Breathing at peace. Mind reduced to mathematics and wind. The world narrowed to crosshairs and wind and temperature and the mathematical problem that required solving in the next 15 seconds or not at all. She calculated in her head using Bishop's Korean War formulas. Wind 25 knots at this temperature created drift that standard formulas underestimated. Cold air density at negative 25 was 12% higher than standard, increasing drag beyond normal calculations. The target's movement pattern showed a rhythm. 2 seconds exposed, 4 seconds concealed, 2 seconds exposed. Scope adjustment, 4.8 MOA elevation, 4.2 MOA windage. Lead target 1.3 feet for movement. Everything Bishop had taught her. Everything she had practiced in the hours nobody saw. Everything that mattered condensed into one trigger press. The enemy commander's gesture reached its apex. Maximum exposure. His mouth open mid-order, body momentarily still, beginning the next movement. Autumn's finger applied pressure. 3.5 pounds. 3.8. 4.0. The rifle cracked. The recoil drove into her shoulder with familiar force. She tracked the shot's path with the instinct of someone who had made this calculation so many times it had become muscle memory deeper than thought. 420 meters, 0.92 seconds of flight time. The bullet arced through falling snow and screaming wind, pushed right by the gust, pulled down by gravity, resisted by air cold enough to change its trajectory in ways most shooters never accounted for. The enemy commander continued his gesture, completely unaware. His subordinates watched him, waiting for orders that would restore purpose to chaos. Then the bullet arrived. Center mass, exactly where she had aimed, exactly where Bishop's calculations had predicted it would go. The commander froze mid-gesture, his arms still raised, his mouth still open. For one impossible moment, he remained standing as if the bullet had missed, as if physics had somehow failed to apply. Then he collapsed into the snow like a puppet with every string cut simultaneously. He didn't move again. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The enemy soldiers stared at their fallen commander, minds struggling to process what their eyes had witnessed. Their leader had been coordinating, giving orders, restoring purpose. Now he was gone, eliminated by a shot they hadn't heard coming from a position they couldn't identify. Then the panic that had been barely controlled became absolute. Some soldiers rushed to the commander, trying to provide aid to someone beyond aid. Others scrambled for deeper cover that didn't exist. The professional soldiers who had infiltrated with discipline and purpose became desperate men trying to survive an invisible threat in a frozen hell. Within 2 minutes, the withdrawal began. Not coordinated, not tactical, just flight. They disappeared into the blizzard, leaving their dead and dying behind, the assault shattered beyond any possibility of recovery. Autumn lowered her rifle and allowed herself one full breath. The first complete breath in 40 minutes that wasn't part of a shooting cycle. She looked at the brass casings scattered across the platform floor, counted them automatically. 23. 23 shots. 23 enemy casualties. A platoon-strength assault stopped by one soldier nobody believed in, using skills nobody thought mattered, defending a position nobody thought was important. The backup radio crackled. Bishop's voice, rough with emotion he rarely showed. "You did it, Autumn. You did it." She keyed the mic, her voice hoarse from disuse and cold. "We did it, Sergeant." "No, kid, that was all you. I just reminded you what you already knew." Autumn slumped against the sandbags, exhaustion hitting like a physical blow now that the adrenaline was fading. Her hands were shaking. Her entire body was shaking. The cold she had ignored for 40 minutes suddenly seemed to penetrate every layer of clothing, every inch of skin. She heard boots on the ladder, multiple people climbing rapidly, forced herself to stand, to come to attention despite the trembling in her legs, to maintain the professional bearing that had carried her through 7 years of being dismissed and overlooked. Captain Thornton reached the platform first, followed by Lieutenant Brenner and Sergeant Wade. They stopped at the ladder's top, taking in the scene with expressions that cycled through shock, comprehension, and something that might have been shame. 23 spent casings, handwritten range cards covered in calculations. The M24 still smoking slightly in the frozen air. Autumn standing at attention, calm and professional, waiting for orders. The silence stretched for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Thornton found his voice first. "Corporal Keller, status report. Sector secure, sir. 23 enemy KIA confirmed. Threat neutralized." Her voice remained steady despite everything. Western engagement appears to have been diversionary. Primary assault came through Eastern approach as predicted. As predicted. The words hung in the frozen air like an accusation. Wade stepped forward, his face showing emotions he couldn't quite suppress. "Keller, you did this alone? All of it?" "Yes, Sergeant." Brenner was staring at the brass casings, counting them, his face growing paler with each count. When he reached 23, he looked up at Autumn with an expression approaching horror. "I didn't read your file. I saw your name and I didn't read it." Autumn said nothing. What was there to say? Thornton's radio crackled. Intelligence section, voice urgent. "Actual, we're getting identification on enemy casualties. One confirmed as high-value target, Colonel Dmitry Sokolov, Soviet Spetsnaz. Wanted for cross-border operations and suspected sabotage. NATO has been tracking him for 18 months. Thornton's eyes widened. He looked at Autumn with something approaching disbelief. "You killed Colonel Sokolov?" "I eliminated the enemy commander at 420 meters, sir. If that was Colonel Sokolov, then yes." 420 meters, in a blizzard, with sustained winds over 20 knots. Thornton's voice had gone quiet, almost reverent. "That's an impossible shot." "Master Sergeant Bishop taught me the calculations, sir. Korean War techniques for extreme cold and high wind. He predicted the enemy would use the storm to infiltrate through the eastern approach. He was correct." The mention of Bishop's name made Thornton's jaw tighten. The old sergeant he had dismissed 3 times, the warnings he had ignored, the tactical assessments he had filed away without serious consideration. Wade keyed his radio. All units, enemy withdrawal confirmed. Eastern threat neutralized. Casualties minimal on our side. He looked at Autumn when he said, casualties minimal, and the meaning was clear. Because of her, soldiers who might have died had lived. Because she had prepared when nobody watched and acted when nobody believed. Thornton straightened his shoulders, making a decision. Corporal Keller, I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star with Valor. Your actions today saved this defensive position and likely prevented catastrophic casualties. He paused. I'm also reopening Master Sergeant Bishop's Silver Star recommendation from Korea. His warnings were accurate. His training was essential. His assessment was correct on every count. He met her eyes directly. We failed you both. That won't happen again. Autumn nodded once, accepting the apology and the commendation with the same professional calm she had maintained through everything. But inside, where nobody could see, something cracked. Not breaking, opening. The careful armor she had worn for 7 years, developing a fissure that let something in. Recognition, validation, the knowledge that her competence finally mattered to someone besides herself and one old sergeant. She had proven them wrong. Not with words, not with complaints, with work that spoke louder than any argument ever could. The brass casings at her feet glinted dully in the gray stormlight. 23 small cylinders of spent ammunition. 23 mathematical problems solved with precision. 23 lives ended so that others could continue. And one impossible shot at 420 meters that had changed everything. The storm continued for 3 more days, burying the eastern approach under snow that would take weeks to melt and longer to forget. The enemy dead remained where they had fallen until the weather cleared enough for recovery operations. 23 bodies arranged in a pattern that told the story of a professional assault dismantled by precision fire from a position nobody had thought mattered. Autumn spent those 3 days in rotation at OP7, refusing relief, insisting that the post needed continuous observation until command was certain the threat had passed completely. The truth, which she didn't speak aloud, was that she needed the time alone to process what she had done. 23 human beings had been alive when she climbed the tower. 23 families somewhere would receive notifications that their sons or husbands or fathers weren't coming home. She had ended 23 futures with 23 trigger presses. It was necessary. It was justified. It had saved countless American lives. It still sat in her chest like a weight that would never fully lift. On the 4th day, when the storm finally broke, and weak January sun revealed a landscape transformed into something alien and white, Captain Thornton ordered her down from the tower. Master Sergeant Bishop met her at the base of the ladder, moving slowly in the deep snow, arthritis evident in every careful step. They stood together in silence for a moment, looking up at OP7, the tower that nobody had cared about, the position that everyone had dismissed, the place where invisible preparation had become visible salvation. "How you holding up, kid?" Bishop's voice carried the roughness of someone who had asked himself the same question many times over many years. "Still processing, Sergeant." "That's normal, healthy even." He pulled a thermos from his coat and poured coffee into 2 metal cups, handed her one. "After Chosin, took me 6 months before I could sleep through the night. Kept seeing faces, kept wondering who they were, what they left behind." Autumn wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling warmth seep through her gloves. "Does it get easier?" "No, but you learn to carry it. You learn that the alternative would have been worse." Bishop sipped his coffee, eyes distant. "Those 40 Marines I saved at Chosin, 3 of them were 18 years old. Kids, basically. One became a doctor. One became a teacher. One started a construction company and built schools in poor neighborhoods. They got to live their lives, have families, matter to the world, because of one impossible shot. He looked at her directly. You saved lives yesterday, Autumn. Not just the soldiers on this base. Think about everyone those soldiers will go home to. Everyone they'll influence. Every kid they'll teach, or help, or inspire. That weight you're carrying, it bought all of that. Doesn't make it easy, but it makes it worth it. Autumn nodded slowly, understanding intellectually, even if emotionally, she still felt like she was standing on unstable ground. Command wants to see us both at 1400, Bishop said. Something about commendations and formal statements. You ready for that? Do I have a choice? Bishop smiled slightly. Not really, but I'll be there with you. We earn this together, whether they understand that or not. Later that afternoon, Autumn found herself making an unexpected visit. She had learned from Bishop where Wade was recovering and decided the conversation needed to happen before the formal ceremony made everything performance instead of truth. The medical center smelled of antiseptic and the particular quiet that comes from spaces dedicated to healing. Sergeant First Class Marcus Wade lay propped against pillows in a bed near the window, his left arm in a cast, face showing bruises that were transitioning from purple to yellow-green. She stopped in the doorway. Wade saw her and gestured her inside. Keller, come in. I won't bite. Can't, actually. Jaw's still sore. She approached the bed. What happened, Sergeant? Western engagement wasn't as fake as we thought. Took some shrapnel when a mortar round landed close. Nothing serious. I'll be back on duty in 2 weeks. He paused. But I wanted you to know something before the ceremony tomorrow makes it official. Autumn waited. I dismissed you 3 times on the radio. Told you to clear the net. Told you to stop reporting what you were seeing. I was wrong. Catastrophically, completely wrong. Wade met her eyes. You were doing everyone's job while the rest of us chased ghosts. You held a line we should have reinforced, and you saved my ass anyway. You didn't know, Sergeant. Nobody did except Bishop and me. That's not an excuse. Wade's voice went firm. I've been doing this 19 years, Keller. Should have known better. Should have at least checked instead of assuming. He shifted in the bed. For what it's worth, that changes now. I'm putting you in every tactical planning session. I want your eyes on every approach, every defensive position, every assumption we make. Autumn nodded, accepting the commitment. Yes, Sergeant. As she left the hospital, she found Private Brooks waiting outside, holding 2 cups of coffee like an offering. He straightened when he saw her, suddenly nervous. Corporal Keller, I wanted to... The words came out in a rush. I'm sorry for what I said about the pillow and the easy duty. I was stupid and wrong. Autumn accepted the coffee he offered. You didn't know, Brooks. I made assumptions based on nothing. I watched you through binoculars during the fight, watched you make shots I didn't think were possible. His voice held something beyond apology, the death of casual arrogance, replaced by genuine respect. You're the real deal, ma'am. Learn from it, Brooks. That's all anyone can do. I will. I promise I will. The formal ceremony came 6 weeks later, after incident reports had been filed and reviewed, after intelligence analysis had been completed, after the full scope of what had happened on January 4th had been documented with military precision. The parade ground at Fort Greely filled with the entire battalion, soldiers standing in formation under a February sky that had decided to grant them weak sunshine. Autumn stood at attention in dress uniform that still felt foreign. Master Sergeant Bishop stood beside her, the Korean War patch on his shoulder drawing attention from soldiers who had never bothered to notice it before. Captain Thornton stood at the podium. On January 4th, 1984, Observation Post 7 came under threat from a platoon-strength enemy infiltration element coordinated with a diversionary attack on our western sector. This represented a sophisticated operation designed to exploit our defensive blind spots. He paused. The assault failed, not because of superior numbers or technology, not because of fortunate circumstances. It failed because one soldier refused to accept that her warnings were being ignored, because that soldier had prepared for a scenario everyone else considered impossible. Because excellence emerged from a position we had dismissed as irrelevant. Thornton turned to face Autumn. Corporal Autumn Keller, front and center. Autumn marched forward, stopped at regulation distance, saluted. Thornton returned the salute and read from the citation. For exceptionally valorous actions on January 4, 1984, Corporal Autumn Keller, acting alone and without support, defended Observation Post 7 against a platoon-strength enemy assault. Despite repeated dismissals of her tactical warnings, Corporal Keller maintained vigilance and engaged and eliminated 23 hostile combatants through precision rifle fire under extreme weather conditions. The formation remained perfectly still. Corporal Keller's actions included elimination of enemy leadership, communications capability, and support weapons, culminating in a 420-meter shot that eliminated high-value target Colonel Dmitry Sokolov. Her tactical acumen and unwavering dedication prevented a catastrophic flanking attack and saved countless American lives. Thornton lifted the Bronze Star with valor. Her actions demonstrate that excellence can emerge from any position when dedication meets preparation. Corporal Autumn Keller, it is my honor to present you with the Bronze Star for valor. He pinned the medal to her uniform. The medal felt heavier than its physical weight. She saluted. Thornton returned it, then raised a hand. One more thing, Corporal. Effective immediately, you're promoted to Sergeant. Additionally, I'm offering you immediate transfer to Scout Sniper Platoon. You've proven you belong with the best. The offer hung in the cold air. Everyone expected instant acceptance. Autumn surprised them all. Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'd like to stay on OP7. Thornton blinked. Say again, Sergeant? I know this ground now, sir. Know what it can do, how the approach works, where the vulnerabilities are. Someone needs to take this position seriously. I'd like that someone to be me. Thornton studied her face, found only sincerity and quiet confidence. Then we make it permanent. Two-person post. Reinforced position with improved shelter and equipment. Direct fire support authority. You call it, we deliver it. And your input on all tactical planning sessions. Thank you, sir. No, Sergeant Keller, thank you. Thornton stepped aside, gesturing to Bishop. Master Sergeant Warren Bishop, front and center. Bishop marched forward with careful precision. He saluted. Master Sergeant